Hey guys, Nick from Dieselheat here. You're joining me today because you bought one of our diesel hot water systems. I'm just going to pan down to it here. And I'm going to run through today what you need to do to assemble your hot water system using the contents of these boxes and your tank to end up with something like this. So, first of all, I'll start by opening up the Packer furnace box. Inside this box at the top you'll find a bag. Inside this bag are a couple of fittings that attach to the top of the furnace. What you're going to need out of this bag is these two O-rings and this screw, so I'm going to set that aside. The next thing in the box is the fuel pump. You won't need the fuel pump at this stage. You'll need that when you install the system, but not to build it. The CD and booklet you probably won't use. We provide written instructions and this video, so you can set that aside. In the box you're then going to find this beautiful German-made Packer furnace, which is the heart of our hot water system, the coolant pump, and the cap that sits on the top of the furnace to retain the coolant connectors. So we'll set them aside here to use to build the system. Right, in the next box, which is the installation kit, just get him open. At the top, you're going to find the fuel line. I'll set that over aside with the fuel pump. The next thing is the wiring loom. Again, you won't use that to build the hot water, but you are going to use it later to install it. The kit comes with a nice stainless steel fuel pickup straw. If you're setting your system up in a motorhome, you may want to install this in the fuel tank to pick up the fuel. If you're setting it up in a caravan or something and you've got a separate fuel tank, you probably won't use that. This is a piece of wiring which holds a relay, which is not something you'll be using as part of our system. You'll probably end up discarding that. This little cable here is the cable that connects the coolant pump to the furnace, and that is required as part of the build, so I'll set that aside with my bits to build. This is the combustion intake silencer, so that's where the air for combustion goes into the furnace and it keeps the noise down. You'll need that to build your system, so put that on your pile of stuff. The next things to come out is the exhaust pipe. Again, we're not going to use that in the building of the system, just the installation, and the exhaust muffler. Again, keep all that together, but you're not going to need it right now. The bag of cable ties, put that with the stuff you're going to use for the build. The next thing to pull out is just some miscellaneous brackets. These are useful to install the exhaust system and as bracing and things like that. There's no specific requirement to use them to build the hot water, just to install it. I'll put that with the exhaust bits and pieces. The next bag I'm pulling out is a bag that contains a whole bunch of coolant connectors, coolant clamps and hose clamps. They can be useful in parts of the installation, but you're not going to need any of these bits to actually build the hot water system, so set them aside. This bag here contains the relay that you're not going to need. The most important thing in this bag, which is basically electronic fittings, is this little plastic clip here. Be really careful to keep that safe. That's the clip that allows the cabling to plug into the fuel pump, and we will talk about that in another video. But again, you're not going to use this to actually assemble the hot water system, so just keep that aside with the wiring loom. That's part of the wiring. There's a little bag of mixed stainless steel screws. You're going to use these screws to assemble the hot water system, so we'll pop them over there. Next, I've got these two stainless steel mounting brackets. This is the mounting bracket that holds the furnace onto the tank, and this is the clip that holds the coolant pump. So put them with your pile of bits and pieces to assemble the system. The next bag is the bits and pieces to install the exhaust system. You'll use this for the install, but you're not going to use it to build the kit. The exception, or build the hot water. The exception is, if I pull this out, this little clamp here is used to hold the combustion air silencer onto the furnace. So I've pulled that out of the bag and I'll put that over with my bits to build the system, and the other bits and pieces go with the exhaust. This next bag is all the fuel line components. Again, you're not going to use them right now, so I set them aside with the fuel bits and pieces. Second last are these 2 elbow fittings. They go into the top of the furnace, and you will use them as part of the building of the hot water system. So they're on the pile of bits over there. And the last thing here is the coolant pipe. You get this nice long length of coolant pipe with these kits. There's a cutting template in the instructions. You're going to cut this up and use it to plumb up your hot water system. So that goes in the pile of bits to build the hot water. So if I come over here, I'll move these bits. I'm not going to use the side. I've got the coolant pipe, the furnace, the combustion air silencer and the clamp that holds it on, the 2 mounting brackets, the 2 elbows that will go into the top of the furnace. And so I've got the furnace top and the 2 elbows, the coolant pump, the O-rings, cable ties, screws, and lastly the pipe that connects the coolant pump to the furnace. So these are the bits that we're going to use to assemble the furnace onto the hot water system, which we're going to talk about in the next part of the video. Cheers. Hi guys, Nick here again. So apart from all the bits and pieces in your Eberspacher kit, you'll have also received a little bag like this with 6 single-use ear clamps and 4 M8 countersunk screws. What you'll need is these 6 clamps to build your hot water system. The 4 screws, set them aside. They're to hold the tank onto its mounting plate, so you'll need them a little bit later on. For now, get these 6 screws and add them to your pile of bits and pieces that you're going to use to build your hot water system, and then we'll be ready to go. We're just going to run through very quickly the tools you need to assemble your either DH9 or DH15 diesel hydronic system before we get on and actually show you how to do the assembly. So if we have a look down here, what we're going to be using today is, to make our lives a little bit easier, we've just got a small cordless drill with a 10mm socket. We've got a pair of carpenter's nail pincers, a 7mm socket, a 1/4-inch drive. Some of the bolts we're going to put in with the drill, some of them we're going to hand tighten. We've got a T20 torque, which we're going to need for one particular screw, and then a pair of snips and a pair of flat nose pliers just to tighten some cable ties. So that's the tools you're going to need to put your system together. And now we will get on and show you how it's done. We've got Patrick on the job here. Smile for the camera, Patrick. He is going to be putting it together for us, and I'm going to be providing a little bit of a commentary about what he's doing. So first of all, we're opening up the bag of nuts and bolts, which is the general bag that comes with the Eberspacher kit. And we're going to be taking out a handful of the 6mm bolts, which come in this kit. I think we're going to need 6, is that right, Patrick?
7.
7 of the just normal 6mm bolts. So 7 of the 6mm bolts. These are the ones that are not got the thread lock on them, and we're going to use them to mount the Eberspacher diesel furnace mounting bracket. And yep. So an important thing to remember is that the mounting bracket goes this way up with the little tab on the bottom, and then that is going to be holding our diesel furnace. So the best way to do this is to put all the bolts in finger tight to begin with, and then you tighten them up properly afterwards, because that means you can easily start them all. The second thing we're going to attach to the tank is the coolant pump mounting bracket. Take careful note of which way that faces, so that it sort of faces with the bracket on the left hand side and the foot coming out to the right. Thanks, Pat. Yep. And we put 1 screw in the top of that, and the second screw just goes in the elongated hole at the bottom. And then Pat's going to tighten them up. So you don't really need to use a power tool for this, but we'll just do it to make it a bit faster. Just what we don't recommend is using a rattle gun. That is just a drill with a ratchet. A rattle gun, like an impact driver, can cause the stainless steel screws to bind in the nut rivets we've installed in the tank for you. So definitely try to just use either a hand spanner or just a normal drill. So the next thing that he's going to do is to mount the D5E furnace. So you can see there's a little cutout in the back here, and there's a little tab in that cutout that's going to align to the gap here. So Pat will seat that onto the system so it sort of goes down from the top and then tucks in at the bottom. And if we look up underneath, in fact, Pat, could we lie the tank on its back for this next bit? We'll lie the tank on its back. I'll steady the furnace. Yep. Normally we don't do it this way, but just to show you, we'll tip him over on his back. So that's there. And you can see that tab on the mounting bracket comes up, and there's a hole in the furnace which you're going to put a M6 bolt into. So again, it's just one of our standard non-thread locked bolts. We do recommend you just hand tighten this one. It's going to cut a thread as you put it in, and so don't use any sort of impact driver or anything too rough, or it is possible to shear the bolt. If you put it in with a hand spanner like this, it's pretty straightforward. Just takes a little bit of effort, and it sort of cuts a thread into the aluminium housing as it goes in. Right, so we've nipped that up, and the furnace is, no, it's not tight yet.
That's good.
Just keep going till you feel it get tight. So Pat's just, yep,
Awesome.
and you'll know when it's right because the furnace won't move on the bracket. Okay, so now that we've got the furnace secured on the tank, the next step is to set up the coolant pump. Remember to take the little white caps off the ends of it, otherwise it's not going to pump coolant too well. And the coolant pump pushes into the mount. It just pushes in, there's no specific retainer, and you just give it a bit of a wiggle, and that's it with the coolant pump installed. Alright, once you've got the coolant pump in place, the next step is to install these two elbows into the top of the furnace. So this is how the coolant gets in and out of the furnace. So at this stage you need to retrieve the two O-rings from this bag that you set aside when you were unpacking your box. And be really careful with these O-rings because you only get two in the kit and you need both of them. So the furnaces have the ability to have the coolant pipes coming out the top straight or coming at a 90 degree. For our system you need the 90 degrees, so you're going to need those two O-rings and the two 90 degree elbows. So you need to slip the O-ring onto the 90 degree elbow like that and like that. So make sure the O-rings slip properly into the groove on the top of the furnace. And then the way this works is the cap that sits on the top of the furnace aligns the elbows. So you slide them in sideways and then push them back, and the direction they point is set as you pop them into this top cover. So Pat has the top cover upside down in his hand. He's sliding those fittings in there. And for this particular DH15, we want the two elbows directly pointing away from the furnace. So if we bring it over here, you'll see as he puts it onto the furnace, we've got it like that. Once you've got it in place, you're just going to wiggle it down, and as you wiggle it down, the O-rings will glide into the top of the casting and seal those elbows into the top of the casting. And then there is a screw hole in the top. The screw that was in that same bag as the O-rings, it's really important to use this screw and no other screw in the top here. It goes in with a T20 torque bit, and you just screw that in by hand. It gets a little bit tight as it seats down. It's not too bad, and it's cutting a thread as it goes into the cast aluminium top of the furnace. So you need to screw it all the way down, and you'll know when it's far enough down because it'll tighten up, but also we'll just wait for Pat to get it all the way screwed down. You can see that you can't wobble the elbows or wobble the top of that plastic housing. So yeah, if you try to lift up the back of that plastic housing, it won't really lift, and that means you've got the screw all the way down. Don't over tighten it, you're just aiming to retain everything and have it fixed nicely in place. Alright, so the next step of the process is to fit the coolant pipes. So Pat is putting our single-use clamps onto the back of each of the tails. This is easier than putting it onto the pipe, and it also means you're not going to be as likely to put one of the pipes on and forget the clamp, which means you then got to pull it all apart again. So set it up with the 6 clamps on the 6 spots, and we can then have a look at how you cut the coolant pipes. So now we're looking at how to prepare the coolant pipes to join the pump to the tank, the pump to the furnace, and the furnace back to the tank. So the Ebbers Packer kit comes with this nice length of 20mm coolant pipe, and we have here a cutting template. Yours will be printed on paper. We're using our one from our workshop here, and this is just to get the lengths of the pipes right. So we'll just watch Pat cut the pipes. The best way to cut it is with a pair of these sharp snips. I'm sure you can use a knife or other things if you don't have snips, but we use the snips because we know that they work really well. So the first part of the pipe, you're cutting from the end of one of the U's So that first little pipe is going to be from the tank to the pump. Then if you go to the other end of the system, so Pat's just pre-cut it to make it a bit easier to handle, and obviously he's done this before so he knew where to cut it, but when you do it you can lay it on the template to make sure you get it in the right spot, and that pipe is now the right length, and that one there's the right length as well. The lengths are not critical to the nearest millimetre, but they do need to be pretty close, otherwise they're not going to lay nicely on the system and sit nicely on the system. And then you're just using a section of the straight pipe and cutting that to length, and there we have it, the 3 lengths of pipe that we're going to use to build our system. So now we'll show you how they get installed. So the first one Pat's putting on is the tank to pump. So it does have a long leg and a short leg, so the short leg faces the pump and the long leg faces the tank, and literally just pushing it on. They're not particularly hard to put on, they just slide on like that. Slide it onto the pump and then onto the tank, and that's right. And then as you go, the next one we're going from the fitting on the furnace, that's at the back, and if you look carefully you'll see there's an arrow on the furnace that says in, and so we're going from the outlet of the pump into the furnace and fitting that pipe there. Just make sure you get that the right way around, so it's going from the top of the pump to the fitting that's closer to the tank on the top of the furnace. And then he's bringing the clamp up and getting the clamp in position for when we tighten up the clamps in a second. And then the last piece of pipe is going onto the outlet of the furnace, which is on the side that's closer to Pat, and that's looking pretty good. And that comes around to our 20mm hose tail that's already fixed onto your tank by us here in Diesel Heat. And that goes on there, and if that's the right length, you should get a nice smooth curve coming around here. Make sure this is not too long, because if it's too long it might kink here. If it does that, just pull it off and snip it a little bit shorter, but if you follow the template it should be fine. And then Pat's going to show us how to tighten up the ear clamps. So for these ear clamps we're using our carpenter's pincers, and you just simply put the pincers on the clamp and squeeze. These things work really well, they give a great seal, it's a very even pressure all the way around. And we find with these clamps we get very few leaks. They're stainless steel, so they're long lasting, and they're a great option for setting up these tanks. Three. if you had any problems and you broke a clamp or you got something wrong and you needed to do it again, the Eberspacher installation kit also does include some worm drive clamps, and so you can also use the worm drive clamps that come in the kit if you felt, for some reason didn't want to use one of these single-use clamps. But as I said, we use them on all our systems and they do work really well. Alright, so the next thing we're going to put on is the wiring for the coolant pump. So this connects the Eberspacher furnace to the coolant pump. So Patrick's going to show us how to do that. If you're hearing a few funny groaning noises, it's not that we didn't have anything nice for lunch. Meet Evie. Evie, say hi. She's our warehouse dog. So yeah, there's a little bit of background noise from Evie. Don't worry, it's not Patrick and me making funny noises. It is just the dog in the background. So Pat has the coolant pump loom. This is a pretty short little piece of cable, and we can show you how to plug it in. So that plugs in down on the bottom of the furnace, and you need to make sure it goes in. It only goes in one way, and you'll hear it clip into place. And we then loop the wires up the coolant pipe and sort of double them back, because it's much longer than, even though it's only short, it's longer than we need in this particular case. And then it plugs into the front of the coolant pump like that. So that's the coolant pump loom in place, and then to make it look nice and tidy, we secure it with a cable tie just to that coolant pipe that's coming down from the furnace. So you can see Pat's just going to put a cable tie around it there to hold it in place. You see we've just got just there. It's not that critical how you do this, but just sort of loop it back on itself and then grab your snips and snip off those cable ties, and that's your coolant pump wiring pretty much done and dusted. Right, so the next thing we're going to fit is the combustion air silencer. This component is where the air goes into the furnace for the combustion process. The combustion air silencer is located inside, so you're fitting it onto the system and it's staying inside. We don't really like to have it sticking outside, because if you're drawing air from outside and you're in dusty conditions, you can end up with dust getting drawn into the system. So you can see Pat sort of just popping it in there, and we route the pipe down in front of that coolant pipe there. Make sure you leave a bit of a drop down here, because you do need to plug a plug into this connector here. So if you bring this air intake pipe too close to that connector, you'll just make it hard for yourself. So once you've positioned it, then you can snip off the end. Just cut it off flush with the bottom of the furnace. Don't be worried about squashing it when you cut it off. It easily pushes back into shape, and you can then fit it up onto the system. So the worm drive clamp that we took out of the exhaust bits bag goes onto that, and then it pops onto the bottom of the furnace. And you just sort of slide it on like that. And then that worm drive clamp has a 7mm end on it, so we're just doing that up with the drill. You don't really need to use a power tool to do that, but we're just making it easy for ourselves here today. And then once you've got it in position, then you just literally need to cable tie it. So we just cable tie it onto these coolant pipes here. So slip one of those nice cable ties under there. Again, it's not super critical how you do this. You just want to tuck it up onto the top of the system and secure it. Because that cable tie is a bit hard to do up, this is where we use the flat nose pliers just to tighten it up. Obviously don't over tighten it or you'll squash it, and that's nice and secure. We snip off the end. And that is it. That is everything you need to do to build your DH15 diesel heat hydronic hot water system. You've got the Ebbers packer furnace installed, the coolant pump installed. Over here on the other end of it, it's all plumbed up and ready for water and to run the air heating. And how you do that will be subject to another video we're going to make for you on another day. So cheers, guys.